The burning hull of USS Hornet disappeared beneath Pacific waters on October 27, 1942. Commander Edward P. Parker watched from USS Northampton's deck. Dawn was breaking 420 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. 140 American sailors went down with their ship. The last operational fleet carrier in the Pacific was gone. Flames from ruptured fuel tanks lit the ocean for miles. The water became a mirror of fire. It reflected the destruction of American naval strength. Parker gripped the rail tighter. His thoughts turned dark. 4 carriers lost in 10 months. At this pace, nothing would remain by Christmas. His personal log contained words that could destroy his career. Defeatism wasn't tolerated, but the truth burned like those fuel tanks. Through smoke and darkness, he had witnessed America's 4th fleet carrier loss of 1942. The Imperial Japanese Navy was proving everyone wrong. American intelligence had dismissed them as inferior copycats. They called them incapable of innovation. Yet they had systematically destroyed over half of America's Pacific carrier force. Japanese shipyards from Yokosuka to Kure were adding new carriers. America was bleeding ships faster than anyone imagined possible. But 3,700 miles away, in Newport News, Virginia, something was stirring. A welder named Margaret Thompson was starting her night shift. Neither she nor Commander Parker understood what was beginning. This moment of maximum despair would trigger the most extraordinary production miracle in naval history. The mathematics of war were about to change completely. Victory wouldn't come from battle tactics. Superior seamanship wouldn't decide the outcome. Instead, welding torches would write the story. Assembly lines would determine destiny. The sheer productive fury of an awakened democracy would transform everything. Not just the Pacific War, the very nature of naval power itself. American carrier collapse in 1942 would trigger an overwhelming response. Japanese naval officers would later describe it as fighting the stars themselves. No matter how many you destroyed, more appeared in the sky. Within 3 years, American shipyards would launch 14 Essex-class fleet carriers. All would see combat. Japan built fewer carriers during the entire war. The transformation from disaster to dominance wouldn't come through tactical brilliance. No technological breakthrough would save America. Something more fundamental would emerge: complete mobilization of American industrial democracy. Housewives became welders. Farm boys transformed into shipfitters. The entire nation converted into what Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had feared most: an arsenal of unlimited productive capacity. The disaster had roots reaching back months. May 8, 1942, brought the first catastrophe in the Coral Sea. USS Lexington absorbed devastating punishment from Japanese carrier aircraft. 2 torpedo hits rocked the giant ship. 3 bomb strikes followed. Lady Lex was one of America's 2 massive pre-war carriers. She had been converted from a battle cruiser hull. Heroic damage control efforts initially saved the ship. But gasoline vapors from ruptured aviation fuel tanks proved deadly. Massive secondary explosions tore through her hull. Lady Lex went down with 216 of her crew. America's first fleet carrier loss of the war was complete. Captain Frederick Sherman would later face Congress with grim testimony. The arithmetic was simple and terrifying. America entered the war with 7 fleet carriers in the Pacific. Japan started with 10. Every admiral understood the numbers. America couldn't afford to trade evenly. Losing carriers faster than the enemy meant certain defeat. June 7, 1942, brought the second blow. USS Yorktown had been heroically patched together after Coral Sea damage. Pearl Harbor shipyard workers accomplished repairs in just 48 hours. but Japanese submarine I-168 found her. Torpedoes finished what bombs had started. Yorktown succumbed following her crucial role in the Midway victory. Though Midway marked a strategic triumph with 4 Japanese carriers sunk, America had lost another precious fleet carrier. September 15th delivered the third catastrophe. USS Wasp was operating off Guadalcanal when disaster struck. Japanese submarine I-19 fired 3 torpedoes. All found their mark. The carrier burned for hours before American destroyer Lansdowne scuttled her. Of the 7 fleet carriers available at the war's start, America had now lost 3. Then came the knockout blow. October 26 to 27, 1942 witnessed the Battle of Santa Cruz. USS Hornet fell victim to coordinated Japanese attacks. She was a veteran of the Doolittle Raid and Midway. Dive bombers and torpedo planes struck in waves. Desperate efforts to save her failed completely. An attempt to tow the burning carrier to safety proved impossible. Advancing Japanese surface forces made abandonment necessary. Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo finished the job in the early morning hours. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King faced Congress with brutal honesty. The Chief of Naval Operations delivered stark numbers to assembled lawmakers. America had 1 operational fleet carrier in the Pacific. Enterprise stood alone against 10 Japanese carriers. Simple mathematics suggested the war was already lost. But King didn't know about Margaret Thompson. He had no idea about the 1.7 million workers who would flood American shipyards by 1944. Henry Kaiser remained unknown to him. Kaiser was about to revolutionize everything. Liberty ship construction time would drop from 230 days to 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. American shipyards had launched exactly 1 fleet carrier in 1941. They were about to achieve the impossible. The transformation began in accounting offices, not military planning rooms. Newport News Shipbuilding became ground zero. December 8, 1941, brought an emergency meeting. One day after Pearl Harbor, Yard Supervisor Clay Bedford assembled his foremen. His announcement changed everything. Forget traditional shipbuilding methods. Carriers would be built like Ford builds cars. The revolution started with a simple observation. Helen Matthews had just been hired as part of emergency expansion. She was a former seamstress who noticed something important. Skilled workers were laboriously riveting hull plates in place. She asked her supervisor a critical question. Why not sew it together like fabric? One continuous seam instead of thousands of dots. The supervisor laughed initially. Then he stopped completely. Welding instead of riveting could cut assembly time by 75%. But welding required different skills, simpler skills, skills that could be taught to anyone in days. Master riveters required years of training. This insight would transform everything. By summer 1943, Essex-class carriers rolled off the ways at an incomprehensible pace. USS Essex herself had been laid down on April 28, 1941. She was commissioned on December 31, 1942. Just 20 months from keel to combat readiness. But that was merely the beginning. Brooklyn Navy Yard developed revolutionary techniques. Shipfitter First Class Giuseppe DiMaggio led an innovative crew. He was the baseball player's cousin. His team created new methods for installing aircraft elevators. Instead of building them piece by piece in place, they pre-assembled entire elevator platforms on shore. Massive cranes lifted them into position. Time saved per carrier was 6 weeks. Henry Kaiser's Richmond techniques spread throughout the industry. Prefabrication changed everything. Deckhouses and fixtures were assembled in production areas. Workers could build them on their sides or upside down. This made welding easier and stronger. What had taken 1,000 workers a month now required 200 workers a week. The numbers accumulated with frightening speed. USS Yorktown CV-10 was laid down December 1, 1941. She was commissioned April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid followed the same schedule. Laid down December 1, 1941, commissioned August 16, 1943. USS Hornet CV-12 was laid down August 3, 1942. She was commissioned November 29, 1943. USS Franklin was laid down December 7, 1942. She was commissioned January 31, 1944. Each launching became faster than the last. Philip A. Kellogg worked as a welder at Bethlehem Steel's Four Rivers shipyard. His diary captured the acceleration perfectly. January 1943 showed carriers launching every 60 days. June 1943 reduced the interval to every 45 days. December 1943 achieved every 30 days. The Japanese must think Americans were using magic. The magic was people. Millions of people working with unprecedented dedication. By April 1943, women comprised 40% of laborers on Kaiser's shipways and prefabrication facilities. Norfolk Naval Shipyard witnessed Emma Rodriguez's transformation. She was a Mexican-American mother of 3. She had never held a tool larger than a sewing needle. She became the fastest riveter in the yard. 30 rivets per minute, each one perfect. Executive Order 8802 prohibited discrimination in defense industries. African-American workers flooded into skilled positions previously barred to them. James Washington arrived from Alabama sharecropping. He became a master pipefitter at Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. He installed fuel lines on 5 carriers. Each one finished faster than the previous. Workers weren't just building ships. They were racing against death itself. Every day without carriers meant more American sailors and Marines dying on Pacific islands. Photographs from the fleet covered every shipyard wall. USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. Speed came from revolutionary production techniques, not just human effort. New York Naval Yard engineers developed modular construction. Instead of building carriers from the keel up piece by piece, they built entire sections, complete with wiring, plumbing, and ventilation. Then they assembled them like giant building blocks. Production streamlined through highly standardized components. Construction time dropped to as little as 14 months for the fastest builds. Every carrier used identical pumps, electrical panels, and fittings wherever possible. Parts manufactured in Detroit could be installed in carriers building in Newport News, Brooklyn, or Philadelphia. No modifications were necessary. The Essex class became the most significant warship class in American naval history. These weren't just replacements for lost carriers. They were bigger, faster, more capable than anything before. Each displaced 2,100 tons. They could carry 90 to 100 aircraft. They could steam at 33 knots, faster than most destroyers. The Japanese noticed immediately. Commander Masatake Okumiya served as air staff officer with the combined fleet. His diary recorded intelligence reports with growing alarm. Americans were building carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. Each new carrier was superior to anything Japan possessed. This wasn't the same Navy attacked at Pearl Harbor. By March 1944, American shipyards had achieved the impossible. Essex-class carriers launched at a rate exceeding the combined carrier production of every other nation on Earth. Henry Kaiser revolutionized escort carrier construction while major naval yards built fleet carriers. The jeep carriers provided air cover for invasion fleets and hunted submarines. Kaiser's Vancouver shipyard alone produced 50 escort carriers. They used techniques developed for Liberty ships. Escort carrier USS Casablanca was the lead ship of the most numerous carrier class ever built. She went from keel laying to commissioning in less than 8 months. Japanese escort carrier Shinyo took 2 years to complete by comparison. She was converted from a passenger liner. Behind every rivet, weld, and steel plate lay a supply chain stretching across the continent. Steel for carrier flight decks came from Pittsburgh mills. They ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Aluminum for aircraft came from Alcoa plants in Tennessee. They consumed more electricity than entire cities. Akron, Ohio, housed the Goodyear plant, producing carrier-arresting gear cables. Each one could stop a 12,000-pound fighter traveling at 100 miles per hour. Plant manager William Davis pushed production from 10 cables per month in 1942 to 200 per month by 1944. Ships without crews were useless. Captain Daniel Gallery proposed using the Great Lakes as a training ground. USS Wolverine and USS Sable were paddle-wheel steamers converted to training carriers. They operated from Chicago's Navy Pier. By 1944, these two ships qualified 500 pilots per month. In Tokyo, Imperial Naval Staff watched intelligence reports with growing horror. Captain Toshikazu Omai served as operations officer for the combined fleet. His later testimony revealed their shock. They knew America would build ships to replace losses. They estimated 6 or 7 fleet carriers by 1945. The actual number was beyond comprehension. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded the Japanese carrier force at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. He faced 9 American fleet carriers and 8 light carriers with his 6 carriers. It wasn't a battle, he later wrote. It was an execution. By January 1945, American shipyards had achieved a rhythm that seemed impossible. Brooklyn Navy Yard worked on 3 carriers simultaneously. Newport News had carriers in various construction stages on 6 different slipways. USS Lake Champlain established the ultimate record among wartime completions. She was commissioned June 3, 1945, after just 15 months of construction. The speed came with sacrifice. Shipyard accidents killed over 3,000 workers during the war. Margaret O'Brien lost her husband when a crane cable snapped at Fore River Shipyard. She returned to work the next week, taking his place on the welding crew. "Every ship we don't build means more gold stars in windows," she told her crew. The Japanese surrender delegation arriving aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, had to sail past an American fleet that defied imagination. Over 100 carriers of all types filled Tokyo Bay and surrounding waters. More carriers than all other nations combined had built in aviation history. Commander Tamichi Hara was one of Japan's most decorated destroyer captains. He wrote with bitter clarity. Americans had sunk 4 of their carriers in 1942. They had replaced each one 3 times over. The final accounting of Essex-class carriers that saw combat in World War II tells an incredible story. 14 commissioned and saw combat. USS Essex CV-9 was commissioned December 31, 1942. USS Yorktown CV-10 followed on April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid CV-11 came August 16, 1943. USS Hornet CV-12 joined November 29, 1943. USS Franklin CV-13 was commissioned January 31, 1944. USS Ticonderoga CV-14 arrived May 8, 1944. USS Randolph CV-15 came October 9, 1944. USS Lexington CV-16 was commissioned February 17, 1943. USS Bunker Hill CV-17 joined May 24, 1943. USS Wasp CV-18 arrived November 24, 1943. USS Hancock CV-19 was commissioned April 15, 1944. USS Bennington CV-20 came August 6, 1944. USS Bonhomme Richard CV-31 joined November 26, 1944. USS Shangri-La CV-38 was commissioned September 15, 1944. Additional carriers were commissioned but saw no combat. USS Boxer arrived April 16, 1945. USS Lake Champlain came June 3, 1945. USS Antietam was commissioned January 28, 1945. Several more were commissioned after the war ended. This count didn't include 9 Independence-class light carriers built on cruiser hulls. Over 100 escort carriers were also produced during the same period. The revolution in shipbuilding transformed American industry permanently. Techniques developed for wartime production became standard practice. Modular construction, automated welding, assembly line shipbuilding continued after the war. Workers trained in shipyards became the backbone of post-war American industry. Women who learned to weld discovered they could master any industrial task. African Americans who had been restricted to menial jobs before the war proved they could do precision work. The social barriers broken in shipyards never fully rebuilt. By 1945, American carrier production had reached levels exceeding operational needs. Ships were completing faster than crews could be trained. Admiral William Halsey testified to Congress in 1946. America went from having too few carriers to having more than could be used. No nation in history had ever produced combat vessels at such a rate. In 1985, a reunion was held at Newport News Shipbuilding on the 40th anniversary of VJ Day. Over 5,000 former workers attended. Margaret Thompson, the welder from our opening, now 67 years old, stood before the crowd. They called them the greatest generation now. They weren't great, she said. They were angry. The Japanese sank American ships and killed American boys. Workers answered the only way they knew how. They built more ships than the enemy could imagine. Every rivet driven said, "Remember Pearl Harbor." The carrier building program transformed not just military capability, but the entire American economy and society. Richmond, California's population grew from 23,000 to 130,000 in 3 years. Money paid to shipyard workers, over $3 billion in wages, flowed through the economy. This built the American middle class. The shipyards broke social barriers that had existed for generations. They proved women could do industrial work. African Americans possessed the same skills as anyone else when given opportunity. The demonstration was undeniable. By August 1945, the United States Navy operated an overwhelming force. 14 Essex-class fleet carriers had seen combat. 3 additional Essex-class carriers were commissioned, but not in combat. 9 Independence-class light carriers served alongside them. 71 escort carriers provided additional capability. Pre-war carriers still in service added to the total. This force compared to Japan's 6 operational carriers, most without trained pilots. Britain operated 19 carriers of all types. American numerical supremacy was absolute. In 1962, Rear Admiral Hideo Yano of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force visited Norfolk Naval Shipyard. Many Essex-class carriers had been built there. Standing where USS Yorktown had been launched, Yano spoke through an interpreter. They knew Americans were building ships, but never imagined this scale. How do you fight a nation that can build in one yard what Japan built in their entire empire? Japan didn't lose to the American Navy, he concluded. They lost to American factories, workers, and determination to produce beyond all rational limits. Admiral Chester Nimitz offered the definitive assessment. The war was decided in 1943, not by any battle, but by the launching of new carriers. When America could lose a carrier and have 2 replacements already at sea, while Japan could not replace any losses, the outcome was mathematically certain. Today, the legacy of that production miracle lives on. Techniques pioneered from 1942 to 1945 remained standard in shipbuilding. But perhaps the most important legacy is the demonstration of what democratic societies can achieve when unified in purpose. In 36 months, America transformed from having 4 carriers sunk and facing potential defeat to possessing overwhelming carrier supremacy that made victory inevitable. The workers who achieved this miracle proved that democracy's greatest weapon isn't military might, but productive capacity. The ability of free people to outbuild, outproduce, and ultimately overwhelm tyranny. The transformation from 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class carriers in combat stands as history's greatest example of industrial response to military crisis. Those workers are nearly all gone now, but their achievement remains eternal. In humanity's darkest hour, when fascism threatened to extinguish freedom, American workers responded with the greatest surge of productive power ever witnessed. The 4 carriers lost in 1942 were not just replaced, but multiplied. Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet each became multiple ships. Each new carrier was superior to what was lost. Each one represented democracy's capacity to transform disaster into triumph. Japan didn't lose to American strategy or tactics in the end. They lost to Margaret Thompson and her welding torch. They lost to millions of Americans who proved that democracy's ultimate strength lies in the unlimited productive capacity of free people united in purpose. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class carriers in combat, the numbers tell a story of transformation. It stands as history's greatest testament to what free people can achieve when their freedom is threatened. They didn't just build ships. They built victory, freedom, and the future. Their legacy floats eternal in words inscribed on the memorial at Newport News Shipbuilding. Here, American workers answered tyranny with steel, fascism with freedom, and defeat with the greatest production miracle in human history. The stars they fought became the stars on their flag. Victory was forged in fire, sweat, and the unbreakable will of a democracy awakened to its true power.